European History with Dr. Brovkin. Today we continue to talk about the 30 Years' War. We will mostly focus on the Phase 2, but let me sum up for you the outcome of Phase 1, which is called the Bohemian Revolt. So basically, the Bohemian Revolt is in Prague. It starts with throwing out of the window the ambassadors of Frederick II. They elect they elect their own king, Ferdinand V of Palatinate, a German Protestant state in west of Germany. The thing that should be mentioned that I didn't before was that there were others involved, such as there was a Hungarian participation. The Hungarians, Protestant Hungarians, wanted to gain their independence, obviously, from the Catholics, and so they were involved, and also there were Poles involved, to a point of having a separate war in 1620 with the Ottoman Empire. And the territories that the Ottomans wanted to gain was actually what today would be called Ukraine, which is the very southern edge of Poland. So this sort of involves the Ukrainians today. We would call them Ukrainians, at that time Southern Slavs, at the edge of Poland. So anyway, the Czechs were defeated at the Battle of White Mountain, 1620. The Poles were defeated at the Battle of Sikora in 1620. Basically, Prague is reoccupied and re-Catholicized. It's done, it's over, it's suppressed. Now, the interesting episode here is that there's an infamous person whose name is Valentine. He would show up again in the subsequent phases of the war. And the interesting detail is that he was a Bohemian, he was a Czech. And he made a fortune after the Czech revolt was suppressed by confiscating and destroying and seizing Protestant property. So he becomes one of the richest persons in the war, particularly because of ransacking and robbing his own countrymen, which is the Bohemian Protestant noble. And that brings a new aspect to the war, which would be pretty much the worst during the entire 30-year war, which is robbery, devastation, murder for fun, just to get rich, or to torture people, to rape and kill, as I call it, Rome of 1527 multiplied by 1,000 times. That would be repeated with devastation and robbery of civilian population. And one of the worst people in that was Valentine. In any case, 1622, the Czech phase is over, but there's a second stage which is known as the Protestant or Palatinate stage. In other words, Frederick V of Palatinate, he goes back to his home state, which is Palatinate, which is in western Germany, not far from Worms, as you recall, a place where the Diet of Worms assembled to indict Luther. That's where Palatinate is. So he goes back and continues the war there, defending his territory. And so in this stage of the war, his territory is invaded by the Spanish from Antwerp, from Austria and Belgium. He loses one thing after another. So he loses the city of Mannheim, which is 1622, and the university town of Heidelberg in 1622. So he loses everything, including his title of the elector of the emperor. So he's stripped of everything, he loses all of his territory, he finds refuge in Netherlands, and that stage of the war is over. A continuation of that war, because it is still the Protestant war, or sometimes it's included as a separate stage of the war, is called the Huguenot rebellions, 1620, 1628. So Huguenots, you know, are French Protestants, And that is not an international side of the war. This is simply events in France. But they're similar in a sense that it is the Protestants fighting the Catholics. But this time around, it is just in France. So briefly, what are these rebellions about? After Henry IV is killed in 1610, Louis XIII becomes king, and he is a child, and there's a regency. It just goes on like before, and then finally to power comes Cardinal Richelieu. If any of you have read The Three Musketeers, the famous book about this period, this is all described quite well, and the events in the book are about the siege, storming of La Rochelle, and about the war with Britain, with England. All these things are very well covered. I don't know about you, but when I was your age, or even younger, we were reading and rereading Dumas' Three Musketeers all the time. In any case, Louis XIII starts the campaign against the Huguenots. So he resumes the policy that was there before Henry IV, the policy of persecution of the Huguenots, the Protestants in France. And they rebel, and there's an open war, and they seek foreign help, and they do get foreign help from England, from James I. And that leads to two famous battles: the siege of Montauban, which is a town north of Toulouse, quite a nice, important big city, and the most important one is the siege of La Rochelle, which is the port on the Atlantic, perhaps the most important city of the Protestants in Huguenots. So the English are defeated, and they withdraw, and they will not participate in any battles of the 30s war at all, and they, as we shall see, have their own troubles. There's a petition of right, and then there is a conflict of the parliament with the king, and it all leads up to the execution of Charles I, the English king, and then to the English Civil War. So the English are out of it because they're so busy with their own religious differences and with a civil war of their own that is going to flare up in 1640 after the execution of English King Charles I. So the seizure of La Rochelle basically ends the existence of Huguenots as a political force in England. In France, most of them emigrate, they're suppressed, are the property confiscated, the Huguenots are suppressed, and then in 1680, finally, there wouldn't be any trace, and the Edict of Nantes would be officially abolished by Louis XIV. So it's a tragic story of Louis XIII's and XIV's policies, which actually weakened France, and this is a separate topic, but the loss of Huguenots and the French merchants and merchant marine was actually a self-inflicted wound that cost France dearly in the next century. But let's get back to our story of the 30 Years' War, and we come now to phase 3. So phase number 1, the Bohemian Revolt. Phase number 2 is the war in Palatinate and rebellions in France. And now we have phase 3, which is called the Danish intervention. So Denmark goes into war 1625 to 1629. The Danish king is Christian IV, and he has assembled a huge Lutheran army. He has, by some estimate, about 20,000 mercenaries, which is standard procedure at the time. But he has one component of his own, which would be increasingly more important. He has a national Danish army, which consists of Danish peasants and volunteers and those who he pays, and that's 15,000. So the total he has about 35,000. His opponent, of course, is Ferdinand II, but also the commander of the Imperial Holy Roman Empire army is Albrecht von Wallenstein, which is a Catholic Czech who made a fortune robbing people and taking property of Protestants. Now, Wallenstein is one of the most notorious figures in 30 Years' War. His agreement with Ferdinand was that he would lead his army of mercenaries against Christian IV in exchange for, and this is what it says, plunder rights. So Wallenstein leads a huge army of 100,000. A huge army of 100,000 mercenaries. They're all Landknecht, they're all soldiers for hire, and their most important motivation in joining this army is robbery, is plunder. And in your textbook there is a picture which when I see it, I cannot get it out of my mind, so horrifying it is. It shows a peasant house, and in that peasant house you have soldiers who rush in. They tie up a man and put him in the oven and start the fire by roasting him slowly. The picture also shows that two men grab women and rape them, and the other soldiers are taking cows and other domestic animals and destroy the property, and in the end, after plundering and raping and murdering, they set the house on fire. So Wallenstein commits unbelievable atrocities by basically repeating, as I said before, Rome of 1527 is repeated one more time. Plunder, murder, rape, enriching themselves at the expense of those who they could point the finger and say they are Protestants. They are different and they have to be destroyed. So this is Wallenstein. But Christian is doing very well. His army is, for the first time, is gaining ground and victories. Then at the Battle of 1629, he suffers a defeat. And Wallenstein advances all the way to Jutland, which is continental Denmark. Copenhagen is on the island, so he couldn't take Copenhagen, but he pretty much overran most of Denmark and with his huge army. And Christian has to sign peace, which essentially guarantees him that Denmark will be free, but he would lose all the territories that he had gained in northern Germany, the Protestant ones. So that brings us to the fourth phase, which is called the Swedish intervention. That phase goes also for several years until 1635. So another 5 years of war is associated with the Swedish intervention. The Swedish king, his name is Gustavus Adolphus. And he is different from Christian in that for the first time he creates something that is revolutionary. He creates a new army. And that army relies mostly on conscripts. That's known in history as the modern army. It's not the Landknecht, not the hired soldiers who fight whoever pays them, but a patriotic army of Swedish peasants who basically do their duty to the king. He invades northern Germany and makes Sweden a great power that is continued to be a great power in northern Europe all the way until the war with Russia with Peter the Great in 1700. So for the next 70 years it would be a great power of northern Europe. He overruns all of northern Germany and northern Poland, takes the whole Baltic coast, and also the new element in that war is that he has unexpected ally. Catholic France under Richelieu, he sends him money. So inside France, Richelieu is destroying the Huguenots, but outside France, he is giving money to the Lutheran army. And obviously, the answer is very simple, because he is afraid of the power of the Holy Roman Emperor and of Catholic Spain, which is right on its borders on both sides, in Belgium and in Spain. So the French policy is to not necessarily support their co-religionists, such as Catholics, but to support those who weaken their rivals and neighbors, and that means to support the Protestants against Holy Roman Empire and against Spain. In the Battle of Lutzen in 1632, Sweden wins, and it's a decisive victory, and it would have been pretty much a lasting victory of the Protestants, but in that battle, Gustavus Adolphus is killed in action. And soon after that, the Swedish army sort of rolls back and is beginning to lose control of the situation, and Wallenstein is beginning to push them back. So that leads up to 1635 peace. It's called the Peace of Prague, which is a truce, which is basically a status quo antebellum, which translate is things are as they were before the war, but not exactly. Big parts of northern Germany still remain under Swedish control and remain Lutheran. But that ends pretty much the Swedish intervention. And we should stop at this time.